Hello and welcome to Charting with Dan, the weekly box office report.
Oh my!
It was a barn burner this week.
It was. We're later than usual because they were counting every last. I think they were going to every theater individually and counting every single ticket sold. It was so close, so we're a little bit later than usual. But it's because it was a
dead heat.
Dead heat. Yesterday was basically a three-way tie with the estimates.
Today,
Yeah, this is as close to box office weekend as I can remember. Less than $200,000 separated first place from third place. But it's like Talladega Nights. If you ain't first, you're last.
Yeah, well, that's I think why it took so long. So we had yesterday. It looked like a three-way race between American Made,
It, and its third week I think of release or fourth. I don't know. I can't even lost track of it at this point. And Kingsman, the Golden Circle.
Today, one of those fell off.
Today, yes. Today, one of them, after much consternation, after much tallying, with a $33,000, we're talking about $16+ million, by a $33,000 margin, Kingsman: The Golden Circle repeated as the #1 movie over the weekend. It was right on its heels, and then just a little bit further behind it, American Made with Tom Cruise. Now, I mean, I guess the good news is that American Made was that close to #1. Not great news, though, for that debut and for Tom Cruise in general. Ninjago hanging in there, 11 million, and then Flatliners, which, let's start with Flatliners. Opened at number 5.
I think we should.
6.5 million. Not a great opening for that, but I don't really think this movie was ever given a chance. Sony did not screen it for critics at all. And there were not even, traditionally, Thursday night, 7, 8, 9 o'clock, you'll get these screenings. They didn't do that. There were midnight screenings on Thursday, so there were no traditional night before. It's like they decided they didn't want anyone to see this movie.
I think what happened was they did. Yeah. I mean, they really limited screenings to if you were covering basically the press, covering the junket. And then the people that were doing that, they didn't want to review the film. I think that they really decided to invest very little ultimately in terms of in the film. They didn't think it was going to do well. And the other interesting thing is that the other horror adjacent and thriller movies that have come out with it, it's almost like they're taking an even bigger hit with its success.
Yeah, Friend Request bombed, even worse last week. Yeah. Now Flatliners. But
some people would include Mother as a horror, but it's not.
It's not. It's
That's
really
a different discussion. But it's another thing.
I don't get this concept of burying a movie like they did with this movie, because if it's really that bad of an idea, then don't make the movie. Like, if you have no faith in the movie, then don't make it. And I haven't seen it. Obviously, I didn't get a chance to go see it over the weekend, and we didn't get a chance to review it. I've heard from a couple people that have seen it. I've heard, despite the Rotten Tomatoes score, I've heard it's not the worst movie in the world. I've heard it's average to bad.
Yeah.
And just this idea of, I guess you're cutting your losses. I don't get you've already made the movie. You've already put millions and millions of dollars into it. This idea of, at the very last minute, we're going to completely restrict the press from seeing it, which there's no easier way to get critics on the bad side of a movie than to tell them that you can't go see it, because they're going to go in expecting that it's horrible. I don't understand it. It seems like you're just shooting yourself in the foot even more.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly there's two questions of burying a movie, and one is how much money they're willing to invest in additional PR and marketing costs, and that's where I think it does become a bet that you either make or you don't.
Yeah.
Because you either have to double down on marketing and try and get butts in seat that first weekend, or pull back and not spend that money, and that's where that equation is, and I think they just decided not to spend the money. For critics, I think it's the Rotten Tomato effect, where they really believe that tomato score for a movie like that will have a significant impact, and they just don't want critics to see it.
But they have to know that having no score is essentially admitting that the movie is horrible.
Yeah.
You're essentially making an admission. So that, I think, even worse than having a bad Rotten Tomatoes score is having no Rotten Tomatoes score, because I think the average person at this point knows enough about the review game to know that if come Friday there's a movie that has no Rotten Tomatoes score, it's terrible. And I think, I don't know. I think that's a really bad strategy.
Yeah,
I think that's really bad.
I would love to sort of, I don't know. I would love to talk to the people about what the thought process is, because I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than we're even giving it credit for, in terms of like, well, we had this much budget and we had to allocate this here and that there, and we just decided to cut. Because the truth is, the worst thing for a studio is for it to be a middling almost success, because if it's a straight bomb, they can write it off. But if it makes even this much money,
Then
they can't write it off.
true.
And then they're also they're sort of taking a bigger loss by the end of the year. So that, I don't know. That's interesting to me.
Flatliners is dead on arrival.
Flatlined.
It's flatlined. It's not going to be in the top 5 much longer. I want to talk a little bit about Kingsman and It, because there's an interesting kind of, you don't see this.
And the impending crossover.
Pennywise versus Eggsy. But no, this is actually looking at it, this is kind of a confluence of events that doesn't happen very much because these two are so close. Kingsman was the number 1 movie, but looking at the numbers deeply, It actually made more money per theater than Kingsman did. It's just that It, because it's been in release for a few weeks, is starting to shed theaters. Yeah. So it was actually kind of this weird situation where Kingsman had the higher gross over the weekend. However, because It was playing in fewer theaters, it was actually playing
higher
to bigger
screen.
houses than Kingsman was. So because they're so close, you don't see that very often. But It was actually packing more people into the screenings than Kingsman was. It just the Kingsman was on more screens. It's now actually tracking. It opened a little bit higher than the first movie last weekend. Kingsman now tracking behind the first movie here in the U.S., which says that word of mouth probably not as strong. It's approaching $200 million worldwide. It had about a $100 million budget. I think it's still going to make money, but it's not. I think they were hoping for a real step up from the first one, and it looks like it's going to do, at least in the U.S., about what the first one did, maybe a little less.
Do you think that they should have kept It on more screens and just taken that bet?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know the politics behind that. I don't know how much that is up to, when it becomes up to them how many screens they're on, and when it becomes up to the theater chains how many screens they're on. I'm sure if it had had a bigger debut, it probably would have been on more screens. So I don't really know the politics behind that, and when they're allowed to pull things off screens, and when theaters start saying you're not playing in our theater anymore. Yeah, I do think, I mean, we talked a little bit here last week about how I was a little perplexed by the venom in a lot of the reviews for this movie. I will admit, however, that while I did like it, I didn't like it as much as the first one. And I think people are saying, maybe getting that word from people that are saying like, hey, it's good, but maybe you don't have to run out and see it.
Maybe you wait for VOD.
Maybe you can wait to watch it at home.
No, but I'm wondering if they should have, if it should have been on more screens. If it had been on more screens, would there have been an opportunity for it to make even more money?
Well, that's an excellent question. And when we look at the domestic and worldwide charts, I actually want to talk about that because it has a couple of milestones that it might clear if they do such a strategy. So hold that thought, because I definitely do want to.
We'll come back to it.
I want to come back to the strategy behind it. Real quickly about Tom Cruise, as you say, American Made hung in there as one of the 3 top openers, however, of the weekend. However, this is the lowest opening for Tom Cruise in 5 years since the first Jack Reacher movie in 2012. American Made. This is not going to be a movie that breaks $100 million domestically. So.
It's interesting. I feel like every couple of years we do, is Tom Cruise still a movie star? And we do these, and then think pieces come out, and we do this discussion about, is Tom Cruise still a movie star that can open movies? And I think then we discover a couple of things. One, he can open movies that are big franchise movies, just like the rest of the industry has changed. And why are we surprised that Mission Impossible open? Like, that's how this industry works. It's franchises that open. It's not necessarily people.
But he didn't open The Mummy.
But the Mummy's not an established franchise.
It's not, but I think I'm starting to suspect as we look at, because Edge of Tomorrow was a really good movie that could not be carried on his back alone. The Jack Reacher franchise has done fine.
Yeah.
Certainly hasn't blown the doors off of anything. The Mummy didn't do that well. This movie opens low. I'm starting to think that Ethan Hunt is a movie star. But maybe Tom Cruise's name doesn't carry as much weight.
I'm saying that I don't know why we're still asking this question when Tom Cruise is in the same place that any other actor in this industry is in. Mm-hmm. If you are in an established franchise movie that people like the Avengers or Mission Impossible, something where people say, I know that thing and I know those characters and I like that thing, that will open. But if it's something that people are not familiar with, and like the Mummy, if it is not good, that will not open. And then if it's something like Edge of Tomorrow, where it's great but really hard for people to wrap their minds around, it will take time to open. Tom Cruise is no different than anybody else, is what I'm saying.
Well, but I think that there was a time
except that he's Tom Cruise.
Except that he's Tom Cruise, which makes him different from everyone else.
Very well.
But I think there was a time when having Tom Cruise in your movie was enough. to
But
make
that's
it the number one movie of the
10
weekend.
years ago.
Those are bygone
Those are-
days. And I think,
yeah.
I think you're right. People are applying kind of an old strategy. Same with Will Smith. There's
Yeah.
a time when if Will Smith was in the movie, it didn't matter if it was good or not. It was going to open number one.
Yeah.
That's just not the case anymore. There are very few personalities. I mean, even with Baywatch, people thought that The Rock was untouchable.
Yeah.
And even with Baywatch, that was a disappointment on his resume. So the days of a star being able to open any movie, no matter
Gone.
what, I think
Yeah.
are fading very quickly.
I think that's anyway. Last thought on that is I'm just surprised that the discussion still happens when the fact of the matter is if Batman is in a movie, that movie opens, but it almost doesn't matter who is playing Batman. It does. Don't murder me. It does in the sense of the quality, but I'm saying to open the movie, if Batman's in it, it opens.
People love Batman.
I love Batman.
Everyone loves Batman. Well, not everyone.
Batman.
All right, let's look at the top per screen. This is kind of a rare thing for the per screen. Usually it's in New York or Los Angeles, but this was a movie that was playing on one screen in Chicago. It's called Signature Move. It made about $19,000 in one screen in Chicago. It's an indie drama. It's about a love affair between two women. One of them is from a kind of a traditional Pakistani family. One of them is a Mexican-American woman. This is a movie that's kind of been making some of the smaller festival circuits. It's gotten some buzz. It takes place in Chicago, so it had its opening hometown screening on one screen in Chicago, and actually did $19,000. That's not too bad.
So when do we get to see this movie?
I don't know. This looks like a really small movie, and like I said, it went to I think it went to South by Southwest. It's been to Outfest. It's starting to make some of the festival circuits, but I don't know if it's going to get the same kind
on a
of
Netflix.
push exactly that we're going to get on the big indie circuit. So this may be one that you have to catch on demand, but you never know. If it catches some buzz and they decide to open it on additional screens, I wouldn't be surprised to see it in New York or LA, but I don't know if this is going to be one that gets a limited release nationwide. But great weekend for that one. And always good to see a hometown movie performing well. So another just kind of a weird weekend of rare things you don't see very much,
which is kind of fun. That's what makes it good. Doug Liman, we talked about Edge of Tomorrow, which I think both really enjoyed.
We did.
How do his movies fare typically?
Well, these are the top 5 openings for Doug Liman. I remember walking out of American Made saying, this guy kind of has a sneaky good filmography. Of course, he also did Swingers.
Yeah.
It's Mr. and Mrs. Smith, still his top opening movie as a director by a pretty wide margin. Edge of Tomorrow, which a lot of people, or Live, Die, Repeat, whatever you want to call it, that poster even has both names on it.
Yeah.
That was a disappointment for Tom Cruise at that time, because that was during the summer season. Jumper with Hayden Christensen, big opener. Remember that? Remember those days?
I do remember that.
Hayden Christensen, action star. The Firstborn Identity with Matt Damon. That was a movie that really surprised me. Like, the Swingers guy is doing a Matt Damon spy movie, $27 million, and American Made opening below all of those movies, and a lot of that with the inflation increased or adjusted for inflation, that would be an even bigger gap. So even for Doug Liman, kind of a depressed opening, especially for a movie on this scale.
American Made's another tricky one because it's been open certainly in Britain and some other places for a while, about a month. And then it opened here later, which the irony is not lost on any of us. I also think the way they marketed the movie is a little odd. They don't tell you much at all about, they just kind of banking 100% on Tom Cruise.
A lot on Tom Cruise. And then I know I was reading a lot of people saying that with Narcos and with so many other things that have been specifically covering Pablo Escobar, and the whole cartel scene, that a lot of people said, well, I've seen this.
I already know that
story. I know this story, the 80s drug setting, like this is something that seems familiar. That's not exactly what the movie's about, but it's a very difficult movie to market other than Tom Cruise is flying planes in this movie.
Yeah.
Unless he's hanging off the side of one and not flying it, I think it's hard to get people into the theaters.
Very well. And that kind of makes sense at this point. Let's talk about... Okay, so it is about to unseat Mr. Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense as the top grossing domestic horror movie. You don't think it's going to do it?
Well, not domestic. This is worldwide.
Okay, but domestically, it's pretty close to unseating Sixth Sense.
Domestically, it's Warner Brothers. This is very complicated because it comes down to what do you define as a horror movie. So a lot of people have crowned it as the highest grossing horror movie of all time, saying, but I don't count Sixth Sense. I personally do, because it's literally about, as Spencer J. Gilbert put it to me when I gave this question to the writer's room, it's literally about ghosts haunting somebody. So I do count The Sixth Sense as a horror movie. Some people don't count it as a horror movie, but it is actually looking worldwide. It is already number 2 if we want to look at that. It has passed, and again, this depends on what you qualify as a horror movie. Not that one. The worldwide horror grosses. There we go. All time, that's all right. I love you, JT. All time highest grossing horror movies worldwide. It is over the $500 million mark, but it's got a lot of work to do to get up to The Sixth Sense.
Is
not
this
saying
adjusted?
You can't do it. That's the other thing. This is not adjusted. I put Jaws in there because I also count Jaws in the horror genre. If you were to adjust for inflation, The Exorcist and Jaws would blow all of these things. They wouldn't even be on the same screen.
Yeah.
The Exorcist would be into the billions, the $1 billion mark. So, but unadjusted, which is how people, there's some asterisks, but that's how people keep the records. It, though, was made for $35 million. It has now grossed over $500 million with a B dollars worldwide. So whether it overtakes The Sixth Sense or not, or whether you count The Sixth Sense or not, I mean, this isn't just a success. This is a
monster success.
Monster, massive, unqualified success.
Yeah, this is a hit. So domestically, I can't remember the exact figure, but we'll have it for you next week.
Yeah.
I believe domestically by next week it will overtake the Sixth Sense domestically. Worldwide, we'll see. Either way, like you said,
Warner Brothers crowned it as the highest grossing horror movie when it passed The Exorcist.
Yeah.
Again, I have to look at where The Sixth Sense is. I know it's really close, but some people are saying, like, well, Sixth Sense isn't a horror movie. The Sixth Sense is a thriller mystery. Cross-genre movies are very difficult to quantify. Some sites count I Am Legend as a horror movie. I don't personally count that as a horror movie. That seems more like an action movie, but some people count I Am Legend, which that puts it down a peg. So everybody keeps their own set of numbers in Hollywood, and I think people decide what's what depending on what benefits them the most.
Yeah, I mean, Warner Brothers, it helps them sell their movie and even more to have that and say, it's the number, you can't miss this one. It is the number 1 horror movie of all time. That, of course, works in their benefit. You let us know in the comments what you consider to be a horror movie.
Yeah, and no matter where it falls, no one has any complaints about how it is doing. It's become a phenomenally successful movie. So, congratulations to it just on its run.
Yeah.
It's continuing to do the run. So I'm glad we're talking about it, though, because this is where I wanted to talk about the strategy. Let's look at the domestic box office. Nothing has really changed ranking-wise. It is up to $290 million. I said last week that I think that's where it's going to stay. But you never know. We're coming up on the Halloween season. Mm-hmm. None of these other horror movies are connecting. It's got $42 million if it wants to pass Spider-Man.
Re-expand.
It would take another $44 million, basically, to take that number 4 spot. It's been dropping about 50% week to week, which means this week's take would put it somewhere around 18, probably around 15 to $18 million. So it's going to be over $300 million. But this is the question. Is Warner Brothers going to make a Halloween push for it and roll it back out into theaters? Maybe. I don't know. There isn't a huge prestige movie that's coming to take that marketplace. There's Happy Death Day coming out on the 13th. There's a Boo 2 Medea movie coming out. I don't know if that's quite the mainstream horror market. I think that's more the comedy market, the comedy horror market. So the question is, will Warner Brothers make a push around Halloween, even in selected theaters?
Do you want to make a bet?
What do you think?
I absolutely think they're going to stunt it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the reason is it's just good PR for Warner Brothers if it does well. Like, to stunt that movie, they'll probably have to spend some money to do that, and make back however much if they make back the I think they'll do it. I really do. Yeah. What do you think?
I think they'd be smart to do it.
Yeah.
At least if you're not going to put it on more screens, at least do an advertising push, because you just made $500 million off a $35 million movie. You can spare a few $1 million for an extra advertising push. I think it would be smart to say, experience it one more time for the Halloween season, because none of these other movies this Halloween.
Watch the scariest movie of the year. Watch the number 1 horror movie of all time. This is your last chance to see it.
Yeah.
Do it.
Do it.
I'm not saying it is the scariest, by the way. I loved it, but
it's really good, though. It's a great Halloween movie. It's a lot of fun, a lot of scares. I don't know. I really like that movie. Here's a scenario, though, that I don't think any of us were talking about. even when it came out. Let's look at the worldwide box office. We mentioned that it has made $555 million worldwide. Transformers has made $605 million, which means that it is actually only $50 million away from knocking Transformers. And I cannot believe this is a conversation that we are actually having. I wrongly predicted that Transformers would make $1 billion. It is only $50 million away from outgrossing Transformers and knocking it off the worldwide top 10 list for the year. I think it's going to make at least another 20 to 25, at least here in the United States. Here's the question. Does it have the worldwide draw to actually knock Optimus Prime off that top 10 list and become the 10th highest grossing movie of the year?
I have another question for you. On a scale of 1 to 11, how good would it feel for you to change that chart? To knock Transformers off?
I mean, it's going to happen eventually, but nothing would give me more pleasure than the day that I get to write dropped out Transformers the Last Night underneath that number 10 slot and not have to look at that number anymore ever again.
I think it'll do it.
Yeah,
I think
it's going to be close.
Yeah.
It's going to be close.
I think it's going to unseat. I'm placing my bet on it and the clown and that damn clown to unseat Optimus. Optimus v. Clown. I want to see that fan art.
Pennywise v. Yeah, if you have any great fan art for Pennywise versus Optimus Prime, by the way, that's a fight that I would actually like to see.
Yeah, or should he go against Megatron?
No, I think Optimus. I think Optimus.
Yeah.
I think Optimus. Yeah. So Roth, that wraps up this week. Now, last week, I guess I should say. Now, this week is going to be. I'm very intrigued to see what happens. Blade Runner 2049 hitting theaters this week. I honestly don't know what this movie's going to do.
I don't think Warner Brothers knows what this movie is going to do.
I really am not sure what it's going to do. Having seen it, and I really liked it. I liked it a lot. However, it is long. It is ponderous.
Very thoughtful.
It is very thoughtful. I don't think this is something that's going to drive a lot, kind of like War for the Planet of the Apes. I don't think this is something that's going to drive a lot of repeat business.
I know. I'm going to go see it again.
Yeah. No, I mean, I am too, but I honestly don't know. And I'm not really sure how much, beyond film buffs, how much cachet does the original Blade Runner even really have as far as opening a new movie? You have Harrison Ford, you have Ryan Gosling. They are smartly selling this on their backs. I mean, they are first and foremost on the poster, but I have no gauge for what Blade Runner 2049 is going to do. I really don't.
I don't either. And it's one of those things that I have anecdotal data, which is just in my small universe. I feel like I am asked so frequently, and this is something I think the studio is also considering, like, should I go back and watch Blade Runner in order to watch this movie? And I think the studio is probably in that question too, of like, do we encourage that, or do we say, no, this is its own thing? I actually think you don't have to in order to enjoy this film, but you will enjoy it so much more if you have seen Blade Runner.
I kind of think you do.
You do?
Honestly, I kind of think you do have to, or you at least have to know
the basic
beats of the original. Like, I agree, you don't have to know it to follow the movie, but your appreciation of this movie, I think, is going to be so much more enhanced. And is that going to play into audience reaction to this? Are you going to get a lot of people that don't know the original Blade Runner, that don't quite know what to expect and are expecting big sci-fi action movie, which this is not?
Nope.
I'm stymied. I'm stymied. I'm at a loss as far as what this is going to do. All I can say is we'll be here next week looking at the box office, and if you ask me, it's one of the best movies I've seen this year.
It is one of the best movies of the year. Absolutely.
So I would recommend it, but if we were here saying that it was a breakout hit, I wouldn't be surprised. And if we were here saying this was one of the biggest disappointments of the year, I hate to say it, but I also wouldn't be surprised. So I don't know what it's going to do.
I 100% agree with you. Blade Runner 2049 is, Blade Runner unabashedly is one of my favorite movies. I loved 2049, and I think people should go see it, but I also think it's a movie that is in a lot of ways, really for film lovers. My hope is that Arrival prepped people more than Blade Runner, oddly enough, that Arrival prepped people for what they can expect a little bit from this movie and from director Denis Villeneuve. And I hope that people go see it, but we'll find out next week.
We'll find out. We'll be here next week. We'll tell you how Blade Runner 2049 did. Did it still hang in there? Do we have another photo finish at the top of the box office? Who knows? Only next week will tell. Till then, I'm Dan Murrell.
I'm Roth Cornet, and we will see you next week on Charting with Dan.
Yes.
The movie report, box
Yay.
office, numbers.